Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee. I'm City Commissioner Dan Saltzman and also the chair of the Allocation Committee. And we're very pleased today to be introducing two new members of our Allocation Committee. We have Mitch Horniker on my right here, who was appointed by the Portland Business Alliance, and Serena Stoudemire Wesley on my far left there, who is a citizen representative from Multnomah County. They will be joining the city-appointed member, Julie S. Young, on my right, and County Commissioner Deborah Kafori. And we're delighted to have both Serena and Mitch to join us. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Mitch comes to us with many years of being an active and engaged volunteer in the Portland community and is a current board member for New Avenues for Youth. As Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of Howard S. Wright Balfour Beatty Construction, he is a member of the West Region Leadership Team and also oversees legal compliance, human resources, and risk management functions. So Mitch, again, we're pleased to have you here, and if you wish, you could say a few words or we can just move on.
I'm just thrilled to be here, Dan, and as a longtime Portland resident with kids in town and a longtime interest in children in our community, I couldn't be happier to be a part of this. So thank you very much.
Happy to have you. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Commissioner Kafori, who will introduce our new county-appointed member, Serena Stoudemire Wesley.
Thank you. I'm really excited to welcome Serena to the Allocation Committee. She has most recently been working at Multnomah County, where she's leading our efforts to reform early learning, and I've been lucky to have her office located right outside of mine, so I've gotten to know her up close and personal over the last few months, and I can attest to her deep commitment to children's issues. Serena has had a successful work history in nonprofit leadership, community relations, and government with a focus on healthcare and social services. She has held membership in the Albina Rotary, the Coalition of Communities of Color, the Portland African American Leadership Forum, the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, the Parish Nurses, and she recently won an award as a Woman of Achievement from the State of Oregon Commission on Women's Affairs. I'm certain she will be a valuable asset to our committee, and welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
I just want to say I'm glad to be here and I'm to be a part of the wonderful work that you all have already started doing. And so I just thank you for having me.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. As I said a minute ago, we anticipate an incredibly busy year ahead of us as we head into a new funding round next spring. And later in today's meeting, we'll be talking more about how that might look. But first, let me introduce the Portland Children's Levy staff. We have Director Lisa Pellegrino, who also is in charge of after-school investments. Assistant Director Meg McElroy, who oversees early childhood and mentoring investments. Lisa Hansel, who supervises the foster care and child abuse prevention and intervention investments. Communications Director Mary Gay Broderick, and Fiscal Specialist John Kelly. A little background on how we got here. The Children's Levy was created in 2002 and overwhelmingly renewed by Portland voters in June 2008. And now I'm glad to say overwhelmingly renewed by voters in May of 2013. The levy provides about $10 million a year to support organizations reaching about 10,000 children and their families through programs in early childhood, after school and mentoring, child abuse prevention and intervention, and helping children in foster care succeed. With the next funding round, we will begin funding programs to alleviate childhood hunger. The levy operates with a 5% administrative cap, and we are annually audited. So we'll tackle now the first item on the agenda by asking for a motion to approve the minutes of our June 4th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, minutes are approved. And now, as we always do at every meeting, we have an opportunity for public comment on any item that's not on our agenda. So if anybody wants to talk to us about anything else, this is the time to come up and give you up to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody that wishes to speak to us? Okay, I don't see anybody. So next we'll Our next item is a revenue update from John Kelly, who will tell us how things are taking shape fiscally for the levy next year.
Good morning.
Morning.
So we are about to embark on a new levy. The year we're in is the final year, in my thinking, of the levy we renewed in 2008. So what I'm going to talk about is not this year, but the first 3 years of the 5-year levy that starts next summer, a year from now. And that's what we're talking about.
July 1st, 2014.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the time we're talking about funding. This whole funding process is about how will we divide that money, and so here's what that money is. These numbers that I have in front of me and you have on this piece of paper, and it's available for folks who are joining us, they're slightly different than you all got in the memo. They're a little bit better, as I mentioned to Julie before the meeting. So I was away for the week, and Lisa and I just didn't get to totally compare notes. So for the first 3 years of the levy, the total projected revenues are just over $30 million. That's that top figure there, $34,76,998. These numbers come from Josh Harwood, who is the city economist. So he tells me a couple times a year how much money he thinks is going to come in. But that's a 3-year projection, so there's always uncertainty. Taking that 30 million, 30.4, and taking away 1.5 million, 1523850 for administration. Commissioner Saltzman mentioned our 5% cap on administration, so that's as much as we could not spend $1 more than that. And that leaves us 28.9, or basically $29 million available for grants. That also includes, we have a fund balance of about $600,000 as a cushion. So we wouldn't, if we spent all those dollars, we wouldn't scrape the bottom of the barrel. We'd still have a few bucks in case projections are off one way or the other. So the 1-year average of that 28.9 million is 9,651,049. However, the next 3 numbers below show how that is projected to actually arrive. So you can see the first year of the new levy, it's just about $9 million coming in. And it goes up from there until in the 3rd year, it's projected to be 10.3. So unless we chose to borrow the money, which we're not going to get into today, I'm just kind of giving you the overview, we could spend up to about $9 million on grants in the first year, a little more than that in the second, and a little more than that in the third. So we'll get new numbers in the fall. October 2013 is when the actual property tax is imposed, and we get those numbers from the county. And then in January is when the revenue, the property values are fixed for the next year's property taxes. And so at that time, Josh has a really good idea of what the taxes will be. There's always estimating. So he gives us an estimate, and he's been very good, save the time when the economy went like this, but he's been very accurate in his figures over the years. Questions?
So the revenue outlook has improved since you put together, since you've returned from your vacation?
Yeah, I think it might have been
what was in our memo before, so it's up over that.
Well, it was just a little
bit.
It's a little bit of money that we didn't get to connect the circle on. So that's the revenue report.
And then in October, we'll get a new revenue report?
We'll have very firm numbers for the current year. And Josh, in preliminary conversations, he says, oh, that's probably going to look even better, $100,000, $200,000 better than what I told you back in January. And then he will also project out the next 5 years at that time. So then we'll have, October and January are important dates for understanding our revenues.
Any questions or comments?
All right, thank you.
Well, good news, John. Thank you. Next up, we will have staff present some interesting findings from research conducted about other U.S. cities who have similar children's levies to ours. And the staff has done some really good research. We all have the handouts, and they're going to go through that, some of the highlights for us of what other cities have done and are doing. And that will, I think, all lead in a bigger sense, and we'll get into that after this presentation too. But I think one of the things I'm hoping we will do as an allocation committee is provide more focus to our investments strategies for the next 5 years. And we'll be hearing about what other cities have done in that regard, and that's something for this committee to discuss in the ensuing months as staff work on that, but bringing more focus to our investments, more outcome focus. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa Pellegrino.
Thanks. So as Dan said, we did kind of an in-depth look around really the West Coast. There are children's levies in other parts of the
Can you
country.
move closer to the mic?
Oh, sorry. Can't cross my legs then. Okay.
That whole thing slides too, if you want to
Oh,
just,
does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. That would be better.
little secret. There.
Wow.
Okay. So we chose to look at the West Coast levies because those were in part what the original levy was based on. We looked a lot at Seattle and San Francisco in the beginning, and we wanted to kind of go back and get an update and find out what had they done and what had they changed. Because most levies, you can see I gave the allocation committee a big grid that kind of went through the features. Most levies have been around quite a bit longer than us, at least double the time, I'd say. So I took a look through kind of all of the documentation that you can get from websites, as well as in some cases I would call people up and talk to them on the telephone about certain questions I had. And so I looked at a variety of things, some of which I think will be instructive for this phase of our process, and some will be instructive as we kind of go through and move further down the line. So I tried to understand kind of what the funding mechanism was for each of them, because it's slightly different in different places, what their total revenues were, so I had a sense of the scale as compared to us, who oversees them and makes funding decisions, so what sorts of governance structures do they use, what kind of funding categories how they divide up their money, and what sorts of things do they fund. The length of their existence, as I said, to get a sense for what they were in comparison to us, whether or not they had overall goals for their levy, or whether they had particular goals in program areas, or depending on how they divided things up. I was curious to see, how people had structured things. So that was one of the most interesting areas of investigation. I looked to see whether they did community needs assessment and how they did it, what level of data they gathered. I looked to see whether they used outcomes as a framework for funding. So there's a little bit, nomenclature gets tricky here because outcomes also could be thought of as goals, right? You could say 70% of the children are going to arrive at school ready to learn. That's an outcome that many people might want to look for. It's also could be construed as a goal. So in Seattle's case, they really used a very outcome-driven framework, which was very much about the kinds of indicators and outcomes that schools use and the things like Cradle to Career use. Others used a more goal-oriented, generally more generalized things like children arrive at school ready to learn. Generalized goal, okay, not necessarily setting percentages and targets along with that.
And when you say, so the three cities you looked at were Seattle, San Francisco,
yes.
and Oakland?
Yes,
Okay.
that would have been a good thing to answer. I know people up there know that, but the people in the audience don't. So yes, those are the three cities I looked at. And I also looked at whether or not, so what their funding process was. How did they make their decisions? What sorts of things did they require, RFP process, or what their grant process looked like? What their grant monitoring and data gathering looked like as compared to ours, whether they did formal evaluations, whether they did community reporting, whether they put out any kinds of reports that were publishable and on their websites, and whether they tried to align what their levies did with other efforts in the community, and if so, how did they do that? Because I think that's something that everybody struggles with and something that we're always looking toward. And last I looked at, there's sort of a new movement around performance pay in the world out there, and I was just curious, if anybody was doing that, and Seattle's the only one who is, but that was just sort of an interesting point.
Could you describe briefly what that performance pay looks like?
Performance pay is if you hit targets or you hit goals, you get more money, essentially. And if you don't hit them, you get less. And then so what do they do in those situations? How do they operationalize that concept? So it's kind of a new thing that's out there, and I think Seattle's the only one that I see that's doing it. It's a little bit foggy on the implementation side. I can tell some details about it, but not fully.
Okay.
So that was an interesting thing, although I don't think widespread yet. So in the analysis, when I was looking further and deeper into these things, as I said, all these levies matured and changed over time. They've all been in existence longer than us, and they've all used the point at whether when they're reauthorized or when they're renewed. In the case of a formalized levy like ours, like in Seattle, that has been the point at which they often make decisions about how do they want to change or how do they want to restructure or what do they want to do. So I thought this was a good opportunity for us to kind of undertake a similar investigation. We're a little bit more constrained in time because some of these levies have formalized processes where they spend a year gathering needs information, then they spend a year devising an allocation plan, then they spend a year doing the funding process. So some of them in their charters have a formalized process that's set up over a much longer time period than what we typically operate on here to do that sort of planning. So this would be a more truncated process just by nature. We have new people just coming on the board right now, and we thought it made more sense to try to take you all along through a process rather than do it with old people who then had to leave. So I think this is a sort of an opportune moment to consider these questions, I guess, is why we bring it up at this juncture. it became clear that there are some features that all three of these, or either two or three of the levies have that we don't really have. And so I was going to kind of try to go through those and give you a sense of what those are. One of which is that most of them are using some kind of formalized needs assessment, which is a sort of a published document that involves data across the community. And in Seattle's case, they didn't really do that so much, but they do a plan with it because theirs is all through the schools. They do a planning process where schools are selected for sort of beforehand as the schools where levy programs will be linked and planned for and operated out of and under the auspices of. So there is this big sort of planning piece that goes on the front end. The others also have all identified overall goals for the levy. They're all, there's structures, you can find it on the website, you can see what their overall goals are. Some have identified specific funding area goals to the extent that that's how they divide their money up, or have identified specific strategies that they're funding under a particular goal area. So they recognize there may be many things that affect this goal they want to affect, but they've decided they're going to put their investments into a particular item that they view as either most important, or that showed up in the needs assessment as key, or that the community input showed was something that the community felt was missing and really needed. So there's a variety of reasons as to how that gets elevated, but that's something that all of them have more specificity around, I'd say, than we do. As I said, Seattle and Oakland also articulate outcomes for investment areas. So all of them have program outcomes, as we do. All of our programs have outcomes they need to be working to, and they report to us on whether they've reached those outcomes at the end of the year based on however they assess them. And we do our best to aggregate whatever outcomes we can across programs. But because we fund such disparate things, there's often very small pots of programs that are doing any given thing. Because most of the other levies have done goals and strategies that are more tailored, they can look at the outcomes across an event. Like, for instance, Oakland has a set of outcomes for after-school programs, and they look at the same. After-school program is one of their strategies, for reaching their goals. And they look at a set of outcomes across all their after-school programs that they're funding. So they can, an outside evaluation can look at that as a lump, if that makes sense. And it goes across all of them. Whereas we fund many after-school programs that track many different goals. And we can look at some common things, but not many that are not common, if that gives you a sense of kind of what that difference is there. All of them also have centralized databases that grantees enter information into. We don't do that. We have people give us information that we enter into Excel. We, the staff, enter into Excel and then analyze because we haven't. There's a significant expense associated with a database and running it and doing that. There's also significant uptake for grantees. It takes them a lot more time often to do that sort of data entry. So we don't have that as compared to all the others. And all of the other levies have completed at least some outside evaluations, either of programs, although most commonly of program areas, where they'll choose to evaluate, say, their summer programs as a group, and they have an outside evaluation firm do that work. Many of them also, like Oakland has probably the most sophisticated outside evaluation structures set up, where they've got an outside firm analyzing all of their data, both outcome data as well as all of the kind of data that we as staff analyze, like do they meet their program service targets, do they meet their outcome targets, do they meet their participation targets, the kinds of things that we look at, but they've got an outside firm that sort of looks at all of that rather than having staff do it. So different setups, but all of them have child-level databases, which is something we do not have. So. Last, I would say Seattle and Oakland have made a conscious effort to try to align their levies or their children's funds with existing community efforts. Seattle has deliberately changed their whole structure when they renewed their levy last to make it into an outcome structure where the sort of outcomes, or again, you could look at them as goals or however you want to think about them in terms of the name of them. They've aligned them with their local Cradle to Career effort, which has a similar set of indicators. They're very academic focused and they're very Cradle to Career focused, so they're going across the whole age spectrum, and that also aligns to the school system, has kind of a milestone network that they're looking at, which is very similar, and that's similar here in Portland. Our Cradle to Career very much aligned with our school district's milestones, which is everything from ready to learn at kindergarten all the way up through graduates college, or graduates post-secondary, or a certain percentage of kids go post-secondary and receive a certificate, or it's a kind of I don't know what the word I want is, but anyway, finish something post-secondary after high school. So they're tracking through a large spectrum of time, and they're aligning those goals that the levy has with goals that fit with the other significant child-serving organizations or organizational efforts in their community. Oakland, they're looking much more, theirs is a little bit broader in the sense that they're looking at many different efforts in their community, I think, in trying to strategize about where do they fit given those efforts and how do they best align with those. So if there's nobody else, I mean, they fund a lot of after-school programming with their levy dollars in Oakland, and that was in part because there wasn't anybody else doing it. So they jumped into a large gap area there, but they're conscious of enlisting with the other partners that they're working with, if that makes sense, in that effort, and thinking about it from a gaps perspective across the community. So that's kind of a more conscious alignment than we have attempted to do some of that, but it's been more informal, I would say. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what is going on in other places and kind of the areas of analysis that we used. I don't know if there's folks, I don't want to talk forever without even an opportunity for questions. Does anybody have any questions so far or any thoughts? I know it's all new for some people, but no? Yes? Dan?
And they all have similar sort of governing bodies like the allocation committee, although it looks like
Really different structures.
larger committees in those cities from
Different structures, really, honestly. That's the most different because of the authorizing legislation, whatever it might be. Seattle has a board, but it's composed differently. And they also have actually all of them, all three have a city department that is running their levy. And so the city department has charge of doing the different stuff, kind of like our staff does. And then they have different sorts of boards above that. In San Francisco, it's the Board of Supervisors. They have a staff in the department, and the Board of Supervisors is the one who makes the decision. So and then they have maybe they have advisory committees that they use for people to give input or provide other perspectives. Oakland, again, a city department with a staff, and then a lot of outside evaluation capacity that's doing a lot of data gathering. So different structures. The allocation plans in all cases have to be ratified by the city body, I guess, if that makes sense, whatever the city government, which is the same for us,
Yeah.
I'd say.
So now we want you to sort of unveil your framework proposal, brief us in more detail that will help your proposal that will help frame our work as we make investment decisions in spring of for the spring 2014 funding process.
Exactly. So we looked at all these examples, and we kind of thought that Oakland was the most sort of comparable in terms of its emphasis and in terms of its structures and size and scale, which is not to say I feel like we should copy them and everything they did or anything like that, but I think they provide the most instructive example, most maybe transferable example. And I did pass out, I think that everyone we put out for the audience, as well as we gave to the committee, just a quick two-pager that gives a very brief introduction of what Oakland, there's a much larger, if anyone's interested in reading, there's a larger document attached to this. This is just the most high-level view of showing what their goals were for kids. They call it Oakland Kids First is the name of it. And then they call it a chart of strategy. I mean, I guess what it is sort of mapping the strategies to the goals. So they have all these goal areas. If you look on that front page, they've got 4 overall goals. Support the healthy development of young children, help children and youth succeed in school and graduate high school, prevent and reduce violence, crime, and gang involvement among young people, and prepare young people for healthy and productive adulthood. So those are their 4 goal areas. And then if you look on that back page, they have taken those 4 goal areas and they've divided up their funding amongst them, which is similar to what we do, right? We do it by program area, but same kind of concept. And they then further look at, well, what strategies, I would call those strategies, to achieve those goals. So they've listed those out and then apportioned their funds from there. And these strategies came out of their public input, came out of their needs assessment, came out of their process. So it wasn't sort of just pulled out of air. And then they advanced those strategies and sort of created an allocation plan around that and took that to their city council, who then approved it. Then from there, they go and RFP the money under each of those strategies. So we want to spend this much money on mental health and developmental consultations and early care and education. Now, all of you who want to offer that service, come and compete for that money to provide this service. So that sort of gives you just a sense of how that structure rolled out for them. And I'm not saying that we do everything the same. I'm just saying that provides an example of how to think about it. So we were thinking that this was an opportune moment for us to try to create a bit more structure around what we do in that way, and in that regard, move toward identifying some overall levy goals and because we have program areas that are mandated by the ballot language, we don't have any flexibility to choose those, and I guess I would maybe call those our overall strategies. So we have overall goals for the levy, but then we have these program areas, our sort of given strategy areas that we know we're going to work in to try to help achieve those goals. And then underneath those, we would have more specific strategies for each program area that we wanted to pursue to reach the goals for the program area. So I think the initial work is to think about what would be the overall goals for the levy, and then do we have goals in each program area that we think we're trying to achieve. For instance, in early childhood, is our main goal that we would like children to be ready to learn when they arrive ready to succeed, I would say. I would say every child is ready to learn, ready to succeed when they arrive in kindergarten, just as an example, okay? And again, many of these things are mentioned.
It would be like an overarching goal.
It could be both. It could be an overarching goal. It could be a goal that's specific to early childhood. There could be a more specific goal for early childhood, depending on how you wanted to do it. So there's many options in there, many ways you might go. And there are many things mentioned in the ballot language that we can pull from. There's many other community efforts of which we work in and are aware of, like Cradle to Career and other things that have looked at different goal areas for similar, they're not divided up into program areas like we are, but look at different sorts of goals and really goals, I guess is the best word for what they want for children, what we want children to achieve and to have happen. So I think there's a lot of points to draw from to create that in already existing things. It's not as if it would be out of whole cloth. So what we were trying to construct it's quicker than we would all like, I think, because it's just, we have a short time frame before we would need to fund. But we were thinking that it would make sense for us as staff to try to put something out there soon to you all as just really throw something against the wall and give you all a chance to comment on it in the coming month, and then revise from whatever your comments are, revise from there, and put that one out to the public in a more formalized process of, we do mailings to databases, we take all the steps that we normally do to gather public input. We have public input meetings. We can gather input on it at those meetings once there's something to put out there to people. And then revise from there, so take in all that input and revise again, come back at the September meeting. We're not planning on having an August meeting since so many people are out of town. Come back at the September meeting and show you what we have, what's the current draft, given first draft, your comment, public comment, second draft, get more discussion and thoughts from you all at that meeting, give a chance for more public testimony at that meeting what I'm talking about here is goals, overall goals for the levy and goals for the program areas, those two steps. Okay, and then at the September meeting, you get a chance to hear more input, and either we discuss and modify from there, and then finalize at the October meeting, or if there isn't much input and people are satisfied with where it's at, then vote on it in September. So depending on where people are at with it. And then from there, develop, once we've got that kind of set, then we want to be able to use we've been in heavy public input right now, and we are continuing, we'll continue through that through the end of September and maybe until early October, using all of that input to think about the strategies underneath our program areas that we think that we want to fund, the primary strategies. And that would be the next phase, and we'd take a couple of meetings to be able to present to you all of that input. Also, anything we gather in research, we always do a research update when we're funding again, to kind of bring everybody back up to speed with what the latest work in the field is around the types of things that we do, as well as we will bring our recommendations and experience to bear given those two things, and come up with some sort of proposal for you all, again, for you to consider, to take public comment on, we're trying to separate all presentation from voting. So we would be presenting, giving chance for comment and discussion, change, and then waiting, allowing more comment, more time, more chance for people to weigh in, and then not trying to make a decision until the following meeting. So we're trying to switch it up so we always have more space in between. And we're looking at monthly meetings generally, as kind of diagrammed through here. So that's what we were looking for today was sort of like, do you all feel like that's thumbs up, let's go forward with that? Or do you feel like, no, I don't want to do that, and I just want to do what we did before? So that's what, that's kind of our check here, is to understand, and I apologize for, normally I would want the chance to work with you all ahead of time on that sort of thing, but given the new members and different things going on, it wasn't possible to do that. So we thought we would bring it to you today and see what you all thought and go from there.
So I think, what I think particularly I want to draw attention to your earlier opening comments was that each of these levies in Oakland and Seattle and San Francisco have been around longer, but each, like our own levy, I think our decision-making process has evolved over 2 cycles of renewal. And this is an opportunity for us once again to look to improve our process and decision-making. And what you're proposing is sort of some overarching goals for the levy, overarching goals for each program area, and then coming back and then developing out of that some focused strategies for investment of taxpayer dollars.
Exactly.
Thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, I appreciate the information you've gathered and how you've shared it with us. I think this is a great opportunity, and I think it's an important exercise for us to undertake. I'm very supportive of this idea. I wanted to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned in comparing with the other cities. One of the, mentioning, for example, that Oakland has this outside evaluation done. And also the idea of having a whole strategic investment plan. Are we calling this a strategic investment plan of what you presented or suggesting that we do?
Well, you could conceive of it that way, yeah. I mean, essentially, we would be doing that. We would be creating a structure under which to invest, yes.
Okay. But the idea of doing, for example, an additional decision around having outside evaluation, that is not part of what you're proposing that be part of this. Is that true?
I mean, not at this juncture, only because, I mean, for one, the cost of it, first of all, you'd have to structure it. We would have to change how we're doing things in order to make something like that work better, I guess is the best way I can describe it. I think that's a good goal to have. I think that's a little bit more downline discussion because it would come after the funding piece in terms of what do we end up with and how would we want to analyze it and what we want to analyze it for. So yes, I think it's a good goal to have. How that would play out, I don't know yet.
Okay, but that's not part of what's on the table.
That's not
right
what
now.
I'm
The
proposing
same
right now,
level
no.
idea of data collection, done some, or they have a way to do that more uniformly than what we have
I
right
think
now. Is that
if we
true?
were going to change that system, that is a long conversation. And now we have a board kind of assembled here that's
Okay.
likely to be here for a period of time. And I think that would have to come after we fund again because it's a major decision that requires a lot of research to figure out what would you want to do, how would you do it, and how expensive would it be. Those are, I mean, we cannot do that before we fund with too much other, it's just the workload's too high for other purposes. So I think it is absolutely a conversation we should be having. But I think it's going to take time to have that, like maybe a year to go through that process. And like, San Francisco has a premier system that other cities have followed their contracts management system there. And they are, but that's a very expensive kind of investment that you would make to do that. And no one else in our city uses it. So there's lots of issues and questions there that we would need to resolve and talk about before we could go forward on that. So I think we should, but it needs to be delayed.
I'm really supportive of moving forward in this direction and appreciate that you've done so much work to date and that you're looking to take on another huge effort in this, and that you've kind of taken enough bite-sized chunks. I think not going the full route and trying to incorporate all the data that all the information you found, but to start with something that's going to make a difference, but that's doable. I think it's going to be an interesting and exciting conversation, so thank you.
Lisa, you mentioned that you thought Oakland maybe was the most transferable example of the cities you looked at. When we get your materials, will there be, will any of the other programs you looked at make their way into what you're recommending, or is it purely going to be a Oakland-focused work product?
Well, it's not so much, it's just more that Oakland structure, I think, worked better for us. San Francisco has really focused on, they've done their work very differently. They've focused on access and on quality. So that's been the primary thrusts of what they have done in terms of how they've pushed forward and changed over time, and it's like their structure doesn't transfer well to what we do, and they are a whole city department that is meant to try to amalgamate lots of different kinds of children's programming issues that run through the city, and they are a city and county together, so everything's it's just less that's what I mean by less transferable. In other words, all their human services, because they're a city, San Francisco city and county, all reside in one government, whereas we have split government for that. So there's some things that don't work as well because we're just set up so differently. Seattle, as I said, really went through they're very outcome focused. They're very, to do what Seattle would do would take a much longer planning process to be able for us to do that because it's outcome focused and they are, they're doing things like agreeing on tools that all, early childhood programs that are doing particular type of work would all use this tool to assess whether they're improving readiness or improving whatever developmental, whatever the tool is assessing. And then they're assessing that against the overall goal and trying and I can give you an example of their report, which would help you understand. I don't think we have the time to put in place something like that in this relatively truncated time period we have here. We could potentially talk, if people wanted to move to that, that's a longer conversation and would have to be, I think, for a future levy, if that makes sense. So it'd be another chance for changing. So what I would give to you all, if you're interested, is probably maybe if you're interested in some basic information on how the other levies kind of set up. They all have some basic paperwork that doesn't take too much time to look through, if you were interested. I don't think that I would copy Oakland directly. I think we would come up with our own ideas, but I think their structure is the most transferable structure. And their scale and size in terms of money and investment is the most similar to ours. So that's really what I meant by that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It just seems like if you found some things that you were enamored with at the other programs, but they're going to take time, if we don't come up with, I guess, a secondary list of things that one might be interested in to start moving slowly, in 3 years we'll find ourselves back in the same situation we are now, and we won't be able to move forward. So you've kind of done you've done a great job of collecting some information. It'd be a shame to lose the opportunity to look at some things that you think are worthy of further discussion.
I don't intend to lose it. We've had pretty in-depth conversations about how we could sequence the work, and we didn't want to lose the opportunity to affect our next funding process because that's what happens first. But the kind of advanced work you need to do on some of these other issues does take longer. It takes a year or two to go through those processes. If you want to investigate a data system, that much I know. It takes a long time. So I just, there's those kind of things that I knew couldn't be accomplished on that short timeline. So they're not at all off our radar. I just think we'll have to go through the funding, get our crop of people. I think we've got some lessons learned some extent from here and from our experience too. Things will change in how we set up that process going forward. But then after that process is done, then the next work needs to begin, if that makes sense, and thinking about how you want to structure for next time. So that I agree. I think I don't intend to lose it. It was a lot of work to do that. I don't want to lose the work. So,
Meg or Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think to Mitch's last question about Seattle, I think the other thing that they have that's pretty different that makes it hard to think of their model as transferable is that their schools are mainly in charge of selecting the organizations with which they want to work and applying for the funding. So we are not necessarily working with the districts to think about schools as the lead applicant and what they want to do and or identifying particular schools really who are eligible for the funding. So to go back to sort of there are definitely things we can borrow from each of them, but I think we sort of landed on Oakland because it had the structure that most resembled how we currently operate and through which we could kind of focus better, if that helps.
This is because I know there's some new members, we're actually directly forbidden to do what Seattle does. Theirs is an families and education levy, and the money goes directly to schools. We are not allowed to do that. We're prevented by a Supreme Court decision here from giving money directly to school districts. So it's a shame because it would lead, in some ways, in certain of our funding areas, it could lead to better alignment, I think, but we can't do it. So it's a property tax issue. So we have to kind of work around it and try to align as best we can in spite of it.
So you're not opposed to taking something out of San Francisco or one of the other ones and intermixing it?
Oh, no.
With the different programs. No. So it's more sustainable, I think, what you were saying at the end, something that's going to sustain over that long period of time and not have to go back and change it. Because I agree with the new way of going forward and having time to go back and think about it and having some time to process instead of making the decision right up here in front. So I agree with it as well.
That was a big piece of feedback. We're trying to put that into action now.
So is there a consensus for staff to move ahead on this and present us with, I know we're going to go into the timeline next, but so as I understand it, at our September meeting, we would have some overarching goals for the levy as well as the program areas for the board, for the allocation committee to consider?
To consider and take further testimony on. We will incorporate what input that we're able to gather along the way, but then there'll be a formal time for people to come up and give testimony and thoughts about it. And then more time to revise, and then vote in October, or if people are in agreement and there isn't a lot of comment, then go from there.
And then followed by some specific strategies.
Yes,
That would be also a separate,
separate meeting.
Discussion,
Or at least a
separate
separate discussion, yes.
so is there consensus?
I have
on-
one quick question.
Sure.
So although we aren't having an August meeting, we will have some goals from you guys to look at before.
In a couple of weeks,
Thank you.
we'll give you paperwork to, I mean, within, maybe even shorter, we'll see. We got to, put it together. We have ideas, but it's not all put together, so.
All up here.
Well, good. I think there's a consensus for you to move forward. I also want to compliment the staff on the thorough analysis of the programs in Seattle and Oakland and San Francisco. It's a very comprehensive document. I assume that document is available on the Children's Levy website.
We'll post it.
Yeah, you should post it because I think people would greatly benefit from it. So that's a good segue to our next two agenda items, which include a review of the funding timeline for our investments next in 2014, and also equity efforts that have been connected with that process. And so I believe
Okay,
we got the same people up here who are going to present on this.
yes. I'll go over the timeline. Lisa's talked in some detail about some pieces of it that are currently in process in the upcoming months here. If people look on the back of the agenda, the timeline is laid out there so you can follow along. As Lisa said, June through September, we'll be taking community input. We've been meeting with policy groups, community members, and also have a online survey available for comment as well. August and September, as Lisa mentioned, we will be moving forward with drafting goals and having input from allocation committee members as well as the broader community. In October, and then in October, we'll analyze the public input and report findings to the allocation committee, giving you the opportunity to finalize those goals, as well as hear the broader input that we've heard from the community. In October and November, we'll be integrating the community input that we've received along with past levy experience and the research in each of the funding areas, and make some recommendations at that point around the strategies that will go with the goals that you would have approved by that point in time. Again, allowing for comment and thought on that, and then coming back to you in later October or November for reviewing that public information, finalizing the priorities, and talking more about the funding process and design. November and through December, finalizing the priorities and the application process, releasing the request for investments in January. Then from March through mid-May, the volunteer reviewers would be scoring those applications, and staff will be working on analyzing the funding requests and preparing information for all of you. Then mid-May through mid-June, the allocation committee will be making the funding decisions, and with July 1st, 2014 as the start date for grants.
Could you refresh our memory about the qualifications or criteria for the volunteers who review the funding proposals?
We don't have, one of the criteria is that it can't be a service provider in that funding area because of the direct conflict of interest there.
Okay.
We'll really be looking for diverse representatives in the community to do the reviews. One of the questions that we're asking people when we're doing our community input sessions, we have a sign-in sheet, and we ask people to indicate if they would like to consider being reviewers. So we're already starting a list of potential reviewers. We have lists of people who've reviewed for us in the past. We'll be drawing on those lists of people and contacts. Any other?
We went to go meet with the Office of Equity for the city Office of Human Rights and Equity? I'm sorry, I forget what their
City
formal name
Office
is.
of Equity.
Equity.
Office of Equity.
And human rights, and human
Equity and
rights.
Human Rights. I can't remember which came first. Okay. Anyway, one of the things they brought up was, and I think actually this might be a city rule now too. But there's a rule around how you construct review committees in terms of diversity to make sure that the folks of color are on any given review committee. And so whatever city, and we did, I think we used it for leverage fund grants.
We did,
because it
yes.
was enacted in that point. So I think that's another thing that we would be considering is making sure we have balance on all the committees who are doing review.
Yeah, the city, our purchasing department, under city council direction now has a pool of minority evaluators who must serve on evaluations of proposals. And there's actually quite a few of them, and they've done
Exactly.
a lot of hard work.
So using that in the Office of Equity was giving us some guidance around that as well in terms of how we might think about that. Other than that, it's people. We look for people who have some expertise or experience with children, children's issues, as well as and try to balance each review panel. So we have some folks who have maybe more expertise, and then some who are just community reviewers or interested and want to participate. So that's usually how we try to compose the panels. It's somewhat more informal, I guess, but.
Okay.
So in addition to that breakdown, we also wanted to give you an idea of the kinds of decisions or kinds of things that would be happening at each of the allocation committee meetings. We do anticipate having monthly meetings beginning in September through December or January, depending on when some decisions are made. So wanted to give you a brief idea of some of the agenda items that will be at those meetings. As we have it scheduled at this point, and know that there will be other agenda items added as well, regular business kinds of things, and we're not sharing those at this point. But in September, to review the public input on the proposed goals, as we've talked about, and then also gather some more community input. As Lisa mentioned, if at that point it feels like it's the right time to make decisions about goals, we'll do that, or continue that and make that decision in October. We'll also share some more information about the funding process review. We're doing the timeline today, but gives more details, especially for the new members, about how that process looks in more detail. In October, adopting the overall levy goals, if that wasn't completed in September. Staff will present the summary of the public input information, identifying major themes. We'll also present preliminary strategy recommendations, and have public input on those proposed strategies at that meeting. And then in November, have the allocation committee adopt strategies related to the goals, and then review preliminary draft of the funding application. So we'll have a draft of the request for investment ready for people in the community to comment on, and for you to see what that draft looks like and comment on as well. And then December, gather or have an opportunity for further input on the funding application if that's needed. And then if we're ready to go, have you make a decision and approve the request for investment form. And if that's not completed at the December meeting, then to hold that over and make the decision in January. And one other thing is Mary Gay will have all these timelines on our website, and also send it out through Invest a Minute. And if there are any changes to the timing of things, that information will also be communicated through Mary Gay.
So we will be meeting, the idea is we'll be meeting monthly from September, at least through May.
Through at least through December and possibly January if the decision was made.
Likely January. I would count on January, and then assuming that we release the request for investment at, after that meeting when folks finally finalize the application. And then you get a little bit of a break because the application is out and people have to respond. And, there may or may not be business that we need to bring to you at that point. Mm-hmm. Usually there isn't. Usually you get like a month off. And then we meet again when we start making the funding decisions, really. That would be typically the next meeting. So you get a little break between. And then there will be an intensive period of meeting to make the funding decisions. And then you take a breath again.
So schedule your vacations in February.
February or even March is safe.
Yeah.
Discussion or comments?
Any other questions? Or
I was just going to note that I think I'm correct in that I think that only you, Commissioner Salzman, have been through this process before amongst the five of us.
Oh.
That's right. Somehow I thought Commissioner Kafori, but I think she timed it just right.
I did the leverage.
You did the leverage, okay.
Oh.
And you did the cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. so, yeah.
Well, Julie did the cuts as well.
Well, yeah, Julie did, okay. I guess
was
you're right.
much more
I'm the only
brutal.
one that's been through this the two times before.
So we will really doubly appreciate your efforts to walk us through this in these coming months. Appreciate all that.
So I thought if there's no further comments or questions, this is a good schedule. And I thought, did you have anything further? I wanted to get Mary Gay up here to talk about the meetings you're
Yeah,
having.
there's
in-
one more.
There's one more
agenda
item, there's one more sort of update from us before that.
Okay,
Is
go
that
ahead.
all right? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So back to your earlier question about evaluators for our grants and the as an issue or way in which we can further equity in our investments. This next update is sort of about other strategies and things that we've been doing to kind of consider how to further and advance equity, particularly in the outcomes of the children that we serve. And so in the same way that we've looked to the other levies up and down the West Coast to see what they're doing, we've been looking at other public entities in our community and other efforts to create greater emphasis on and a more informed way of furthering the goal of equity in our community. So we have looked at such tools as the Multnomah County Equity and Empowerment Lens, publications from the City Office of Equity and Human Rights. As Lisa indicated, we've already had a meeting with them to look even more specifically at our application questions, the way they're structured, and some of our scoring criteria around our applications. And then even later grant monitoring and accountability to equity as we're further down the road. We've consulted the Urban League's Racial Equity Strategy Guide. We've looked at the Oregon Education Investment Board's draft equity lens and the Portland Public Schools equity policy. We've consulted with a tool from GrantCraft. It's grant making with a racial equity lens. And then finally, through Lisa's participation in the steering committee for the local Cradle to Career effort, the collaborative that's formed around eliminating disparities within the school system is also putting together an organizational assessment tool that they are piloting right now. And so we've sort of looked at how we might eventually be able to incorporate that into our work down the road as it's more finalized. To go back to the Oakland example that we looked at earlier, as I was reading it, one of the things that kind of popped out to me is that the Oakland set not only a mission and vision, but also some value statements that guide their work, and one of their leading values in there was equity. So thinking about how we might consider our work in this next funding round by looking at other examples of how folks are incorporating equity as a value or a goal in their work. One of the things that Oakland did was with their formal needs assessment, looking at the data on the disproportionate negative outcomes experienced by children of color, such as the achievement gap, such as entrance into child welfare or expulsion from school, and just sort of thinking about how we're going to use those data or those other examples to really set the stage for some kind of strategy for furthering equity in our investments as well. So as we come back to you in these next few months with thinking about our overall goals and strategies between September, October, November, this equity piece will also be incorporated into what we'll be bringing you.
And, just for the benefit of our new members, in our previous allocation round, our last investment cycle, when we were evaluating requests for investment, we did add extra points if the program was serving children east of 82nd Avenue.
That's correct.
And we added extra points if the board was culturally specific. Is that correct?
Well, it was more than that. It was a larger definition about culturally specific programs, not just about their board, but also who they serve, whether or not the environment is recognizable as being culturally specific by the consumer, and having sort of an environment that is indeed resembling the culture that you're serving, other elements as well. Any questions on that equity piece?
So you do have some public meetings coming up starting this week and into August. Is somebody there? I think just get that. We should get those out in the record here, since we have.
Sure.
Come on up here, Mary Gay. Yeah, and get on TV. Plug those meetings.
Sure. Yeah, we've been publicizing those meetings on the website, on Facebook, sending out through our database, putting them in the newspapers. So our first meeting is tomorrow, and it is at the Midland Library, and it's at 2 p.m. And our second public meeting is Thursday, August 22nd, and that's the North Portland Library. It's up on Killingsworth. And then our last public meeting, our public input meeting, is Tuesday, September 24th, and it's at 1:30 at the Downtown Library. So we invite anyone in the community to attend, of course, our grantees, other service providers, really anyone who wants to come, and as we're gathering public input from, again, policy groups, community members, again, we'll be talking about a number of topics: division of levy resources between funding areas, community needs and gaps in our system, alignment of levy resources with other system efforts, equity issues, and just kind of going through our funding process and gathering input on how we can improve that. So we invite anyone in the community to attend those meetings. The 22nd is at 2:30 p.m. That's at the North Portland Library on Killingsworth. Tuesday, September 24th at 1:30 at the Downtown Library.
August 24th. Is it September
August
24th?
22nd at 2 p.m.
August 22nd at 2:30 p.m. at the North Portland Library. Tuesday, September 24th at 1:30 at the Downtown Library. And our one tomorrow is at 2 p.m. at the Midland Library. And those are
the one at the Downtown Library is September 24th, not August 24th.
It's at September 24th at 1:30 p.m. Yeah. The August 22nd is a Thursday, and that's at 2:30, and that's at the North Portland Library.
And the one tomorrow is at the Midland Library, which is on Northeast 122nd.
122nd, yeah, and that's at 2 p.m.
Are you not going to do any in the evening?
We have been having other input meetings, and we've been going out to different service providers and organizations and kind of meeting them at where they're at. We haven't wanted to create new meetings for them since they're so busy, so staff has been going out to where they're at and incorporating that into other meetings that they have, maybe other staff meetings. And they've worked us into their agenda so that we're not creating new work for them or having them together again. So really, we're going to meeting them at where they're at. So we've had night meetings, morning meetings, afternoon, kind of the whole gamut.
Yeah, I think somewhere, I know you've shown me the document. I think you've.
Big
You should
spreadsheet,
make sure
yeah.
all the allocation committee members see all the other efforts you're making as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up to the table.
When I met with the two new folks, I know I kind of updated you all on that spreadsheet of kind of who we were going out to talk to gather input from, which were sort of policy level people as well as some more community level groups. And we're, I would say maybe, as at the last assessment, we're maybe about a third of the way through that set of folks that we have identified. So we still have a ways to go. And those meetings are occurring at all times of day, so that we try to meet with people whenever they're meeting. And as Mary Gay said, try not to create new meetings, so whenever I went to the group that you're on. So whenever people's normal meetings time, normal meal times are. We didn't do evening meetings for the public input meetings because, there's a variety of reasons why, but providers in particular, the big public input meetings are heavily attended by providers, and it's usually easier for people to get there during the workday. So that was why we did that. I mean, we would like to get community members, but what we've discovered is that community members don't necessarily come to public input meetings. It's just not necessarily, it's a big venue for providers. So we're trying to reach community members through a variety of other ways that are not necessarily directed at giant meetings. Does that make sense?
And we also have our survey up. If anyone hasn't taken the survey, please take it. It'll be in the Invest a Minute, in the newsletter. It's on our Facebook page, and it's on our website on the homepage. So we're really trying to get as many people as we can to take the survey.
And we are getting it translated. We haven't had that finished yet, but we're going to get it translated and made into a multiple choice so we can send it out to folks in other languages.
Well, how long is that survey open to be?
It'll be open
It'll
through
be open end of September.
September, yeah. And Deborah, thank you for running in your newsletter, I believe. Thank you.
Great. So this does conclude our formal agenda, but I did think we would take an opportunity if anybody in the public wants to comment on anything they've heard us discuss. Anybody out there? Okay. So this does conclude our meeting. Levy staff will send out notices regarding the September meeting. So everybody have a safe, relaxing summer and store up your strength, because you're going to need it. So we stand adjourned. Welcome to our new members again. You need your strength and fortitude.